Hi, I'm Bob from Plastic Pipe Shop, and in this video we're going to have a look at the difference between a parallel thread and a tapered thread. Now, the standard threads we use in the UK and throughout most of the world apart from North America are BSP threads. BSP threads can come in either a parallel or they can come in a taper thread. Most brass fittings you get and steel fittings you get are always in tapered threads. But quite a lot of plastic fittings do come in parallel threads. It really depends on the manufacturer. Some manufacturers manufacture their male fittings as a male fitting because the thread is on the outside, their male fittings in a taper and their female fittings as a parallel. Other manufacturers do their male fittings as a taper again, but their female as a taper. So it does depend on the manufacturer. But there are a few rules that you need to follow when threading your pipework, because if you don't pay attention to tapers and parallels, you're going to run into trouble at some stage. So, what's the difference between the two? If you have a look at this diagram here, you'll see on the top we've got the tapered thread. Now the tapered thread, I've really exaggerated it on the diagram. If you look at the threads here, and you'll hardly notice a difference with them. I'll put them together like that, and you can see actually one of those is parallel and one of those is tapered. And you can really hardly see any difference on them at all. So what I've done for the sake of this diagram up here, I've really exaggerated the difference between a taper and a parallel thread. So on the top we have a tapered thread, and that means it starts off near the base end of the thread much wider than it ends up at the far end of the thread. Okay, so the diameter of the thread gets less the further down the thread that you go. On a parallel thread, as you can see by the picture on the bottom, the diameter of the thread is the same all the way along. Okay, so it's the same diameter at the base of the unit as it is at the end of the thread. The worst combination we can have is to try and thread a parallel thread. I've got one here. This is a tank connector actually, so we've got our seals and our nut on here. So this kind of fitting needs to have a parallel thread because this nut has to thread all the way along. If it was a taper thread, the nut would be really loose at this end and it would get too tight at this end because the thread is going to get bigger. So this has to be a parallel thread. This is one of the rare fittings that always has a parallel thread on it. That's why I'm using it as a good example here. So if we try and thread a parallel male into a taper female, this is what happens. So we get it locked in, it starts off all nice and then it jams up. Okay, because the taper female is getting narrower as it goes into the socket, but this is the same width all the way. So we've actually got about one thread in there, okay, and then it's really starting to lock up. So we're not going to thread that anymore. So the worst mix you can get is a parallel male into a taper female. This one here is a tapered male, so it's tapering down towards the end of the thread a bit, and I'll thread this into my tapered female, and that's gone in about 4 or 5 thread lengths. Now the thread is locked up nicely, so that's going to give us a nice seal. Obviously we need to use PTFE tape or cord or hemp or something like that in there to seal the thread, but 4 or 5 threads is plenty to seal it. People often think you want the thread going right the way down so that the edge of this fitting here is butted up against the edge of this fitting here. That's not the case at all. Because if that happens, then it means the thread has completely bottomed out and it hasn't actually bitten anywhere at all, and you're going to get a leaking fitting. So it's a bit of an old wives' tale that a thread needs to go in all the way. Okay, so I can unscrew that. So that was a taper into a taper, which is a good mix. It's going to give you a good seal. Here now we've got a taper male going into a parallel female. So we'll thread this in. Again, and it goes, going in nicely at the start. Going in nicely all the way. You can see it goes in a lot further, but it still locks before it gets to the bottom of the thread. Okay, and that's what you're looking for. You're looking to get 4 or 5 threads in and a good lock before the thread bottoms out. So again, a taper male into a parallel female, that's okay as a mix as well. Parallel male into a parallel female goes right the way down to the bottom on the inside. Okay, now this is a real big thread, so it's not going to bottom out, but that's gone right the way in, right the way down to the bottom. So it's actually trying to seal on the bottom of the thread rather than seal on the thread itself. So that's probably going to seal for us, but it could be fairly dodgy for us. Most pumps and pieces of equipment and things like that come with if they've got a female thread on them, you'll find it'll be a female taper. If they've got a male thread, you'll find it'll be a male taper, unless they've got a special O-ring fitting that goes on top. But in general, if it's just a threaded piece of equipment that comes to you, it'll be a tapered thread in it. Just to sum up, we'll look at the table here. So, a parallel male to a tapered female is a big no-no. Okay? A tapered male to a parallel female, yeah, that's probably the best seal you're going to get. A parallel male to a parallel female is still probably going to seal. Might not be the easiest seal to get, you might get the occasional drip coming out of it, but in general that's okay as well. So I hope that's cleared up some of the mystery between parallel and tapered threads and when to use which thread and which ones are compatible. If you've got any more queries, you can always ring the office and we'll be happy to advise you. Thanks for watching. Bye.